Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. Can an HOA really just steal your land? Mine tried. They built a public trail through my private woods while I was on a work trip. I was furious, but my anger turned to shock when my lawyer found out the real reason they built that path. And it was pure fraud. I need to start by saying that I never thought I'd be the kind of person to end up in a years-long legal battle. I'm not litigious by nature. I mind my own business, pay my taxes, and generally try to get along with people. But sometimes you reach a point where you can't just let something go, especially when someone decides your property is theirs to do with as they please. I bought my house about 8 years ago. It's nothing fancy. A modest 3-bedroom ranch on just over 2 acres of land in what was, at the time, a pretty rural area about 30 minutes outside the city. The property has about an acre of lawn around the house, and the back acre and a half is wooded. Nothing special, just your standard mix of oak, maple, and pine trees with the usual undergrowth. I like the privacy. When I bought the property, the title company required a survey because of the unusual lot size and some questions about the property line along the back. I kept all those documents in my files, not thinking much about them at the time. About 3 years ago, a developer bought the farmland adjacent to my property and put in a subdivision. I wasn't thrilled about losing the open space, but I understood it was bound to happen eventually. The development was called Whispering Pines, or some equally generic name. They built about 60 homes, all pretty much identical. Those modern farmhouse-style houses that are everywhere now. The subdivision had its own internal road network, but the only way in or out was a long, winding entrance road that connected to the county highway about a mile down from where my property sat. Here's where the geography matters. My house sits right on the main county road. The subdivision entrance is about a mile south of me. So, if you lived in Whispering Pines and wanted to walk or bike to anywhere on the main road, the convenience store, the bus stop, the elementary school, you had to walk all the way down their entrance road, then a mile up the county highway. It wasn't a huge deal for drivers, but the highway doesn't have sidewalks, so it was genuinely inconvenient and somewhat dangerous for pedestrians and cyclists. I understood their frustration. I really did, but that wasn't my problem to solve. The problem started about 6 months after the subdivision was fully occupied. One morning I woke up to the sound of heavy machinery, which was unusual because I don't live near any farms or construction sites. I looked out my back window and saw a small excavator tearing up the wooded area behind my house. I threw on some clothes and ran outside, and that's when I met the crew foreman. Nice enough guy, probably in his 50s, and he seemed just as confused as I was when I told him this was my property. He showed me a work order that had been issued by the HOA board, authorizing the creation of a walking path that would connect the subdivision to the main road. The path was supposed to run through my woods, coming out right near my driveway on the county road. According to his paperwork, the HOA had secured all necessary permissions and easements. I told him in very clear terms that nobody had asked my permission for anything, and this was absolutely my property. He got on his phone, and I could hear him having a heated conversation with someone. Eventually, he told his crew to pack it up, and they left. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. 2 days later, I got a call from someone who identified herself as Sophia Hendricks, president of the Whispering Pines HOA board. She was pleasant at first, explaining that there had been some confusion about the property boundaries. She said they'd had a survey done and believed the wooded area was actually part of the subdivision's common ground. I told her I had my own survey from when I purchased the property, and I was absolutely certain the land was mine. That's when her tone changed. She told me that the path would be a benefit to the community and that I should be willing to work with my neighbors. She said it would barely impact me since it was just going through the woods, and suggested that I was being unreasonable by objecting to something that would help families with children get to school safely. I told her that while I sympathized with the pedestrian access issue, the solution wasn't to build on my property without permission. I suggested they take it up with the county if they wanted a sidewalk along the highway, or perhaps build their own path through subdivision land. She said that wasn't feasible and that they'd already invested money in planning this project. The conversation ended badly with her suggesting that I'd be hearing from their attorney. A week later, I did hear from their attorney. The letter was full of legal jargon, but the basic message was that they believed they had a legal right to build the path based on some obscure provision about community access and the greater good. They also claimed that because the wooded area was unused, and I hadn't objected during the initial planning phase, which I'd never been notified about, I had somehow waived my rights. I took the letter to a real estate attorney in town, a guy named Richard Chen who'd been recommended by a colleague. Richard read through the letter and actually laughed. He said it was one of the flimsiest legal arguments he'd ever seen, and that an HOA has no authority whatsoever to claim someone else's private property for community use. He drafted a response that was professional but firm, making it clear that any construction on my property would be considered trespassing and property damage. I thought that would be the end of it. Again, I was wrong. A month later, I came home from a work trip to find that the walking path had been completed. While I'd been gone for 5 days at a conference in Chicago, they'd apparently decided to just do it anyway. The path was about 6 feet wide, covered in crushed gravel with those little solar-powered pathway lights along both sides. It cut right through my woods with trees cleared on either side to make it feel open and safe. They'd even installed a little decorative sign at the entrance that said, "Whispering Pines Community Trail." I was livid. I took probably 100 photos from every angle, then called Richard immediately. He was just as angry as I was. We immediately filed a lawsuit for trespass and property damage, and requested a preliminary injunction to prevent the HOA from allowing anyone to use the path while the case was pending. We had to file a motion for the injunction, which required a hearing. The judge reviewed the property records and survey documents we provided. His written order was pretty straightforward. The HOA had no legal right to use the property. The injunction was granted, and a hearing was scheduled to determine damages. The HOA put up signs saying the path was temporarily closed, but I'd see people using it anyway, especially in the evenings. I documented every instance I could, taking photos and notes. Richard said this would help our case. The lawsuit formally began in the spring, and that's when everything started moving at the pace of continental drift. The HOA hired a law firm out of the city, and their first move was to file a motion to dismiss, arguing that we hadn't proven actual damages since it was just unused woodland. The judge denied that motion pretty quickly, which was satisfying. Then we entered discovery, which is apparently the legal term for everyone requests massive amounts of documents from everyone else and fights about what they have to turn over. We requested all financial records related to the path project. The HOA fought us on this for months, claiming financial privacy and arguing that their internal finances weren't relevant to a simple trespass case. We had to file multiple motions to compel, and the judge kept siding with us, ordering them to produce the documents. This process dragged on for over a year. I'd almost forgotten what life was like before I was dealing with lawyers and court dates and document reviews. Every time I thought we were making progress, there'd be another delay, another motion, another hearing. When we finally got the records, and I mean finally, it was almost 14 months after we'd first requested them, they arrived in 3 bankers' boxes full of invoices, contracts, payment records, and email threads. Richard hired a forensic accountant to go through everything. Her name was Susan, and she charged $350 an hour, which made me nervous, but Richard assured me it would be worth it. 3 months later, Susan came back with a report that made Richard call me at work, which he never did. When my attorney saw these records, he called me immediately. I could hear the excitement in his voice. This was bigger than either of us had expected. The HOA had paid the paving company almost 3 times the normal rate for the work. Susan had compared the invoices to typical market rates for similar projects, and the numbers were wildly inflated. A path that should have cost maybe $15,000 to $20,000 had been billed at just over $60,000, but it got worse. The paving company was owned by a guy named Ethan Paulson. Ethan Paulson was married to Karen Paulson. Karen Paulson's maiden name was Karen Hendricks. Karen was Sophia Hendricks' sister. The HOA board president had hired her brother-in-law's company and approved massively inflated invoices. When Susan dug deeper into the payment records, she found that some invoices included charges for materials that were never delivered and labor hours that didn't match up with the actual construction timeline. There were receipts for equipment rentals that other invoices suggested the company already owned. It was a mess of fraudulent billing. Richard said we needed to amend our lawsuit immediately. We added fraud charges and named the paving company and Ethan Paulson as additional defendants. This reset parts of the legal timeline, which meant more delays, more discovery, more everything. The HOA's legal strategy got desperate at this point. They filed a counterclaim saying that I had created a hostile environment for the community and that my refusal to allow the path was damaging property values in the subdivision. It was laughable, but it still required Richard to spend time responding to it. They also tried to argue that even if there was some billing irregularity, that didn't change the fact that the path served a community good. We spent another 6 months in depositions. I had to sit for 2 full days of questioning by the HOA's attorneys, who tried every angle they could think of to make me look unreasonable. They asked about every interaction I'd ever had with subdivision residents, basically none. Whether I'd ever complained about noise or traffic, I hadn't. Whether I used the main road myself, obviously, and on and on. They were trying to paint me as some kind of antisocial hermit who was standing in the way of progress out of spite. Richard's cross-examination of Sophia Hendricks was the highlight of the whole process. She tried to maintain that she didn't know Ethan Paulson was her brother-in-law, which was absurd. Richard produced email evidence showing that she'd attended Ethan and Karen's wedding just 2 years before the path was built. She claimed she didn't know the billing was inflated, but Richard showed her emails where she'd specifically instructed the HOA's treasurer not to get comparison quotes because they were working with a trusted contractor. Ethan's deposition was even worse for them. He couldn't explain the invoices for materials that were never delivered. He claimed they were clerical errors, but there were dozens of them. When Richard asked him to explain the labor hours, he got flustered and contradicted himself multiple times. The trial finally started in October, almost 3 years after they'd built the path. The trial lasted almost 3 weeks, with dozens of witnesses and hundreds of exhibits. The HOA's attorney tried every trick in the book to make me look unreasonable. They brought in a land use expert who tried to argue that the path served a community good and that I should be compelled to grant an easement. My attorney objected to most of this testimony as irrelevant. The question wasn't whether the path was nice to have, but whether they had any legal right to build it on my land in the first place. Richard's closing argument focused on 2 simple points. They built on my land without permission, which is trespassing and property damage, and they did it using money fraudulently obtained from HOA members through a corrupt billing scheme. He told the jury that this wasn't about whether a walking path was a good idea in theory. It was about whether anyone has the right to take someone else's property for their own use. The jury deliberated for a day and a half. When they came back, they found in my favor on every single count. The HOA was ordered to pay for complete restoration of my property, about $45,000 for the actual work of removing the path, replanting trees, and restoring the natural grade, plus damages for trespassing, loss of use of my property, and legal fees. The total came to just over $80,000. Not a fortune, but enough to make the point, but the real damage was to the paving company. The fraud charges stuck, and the judgment against them included paying back all the money they'd fraudulently billed to the HOA. Nearly $300,000 in inflated charges across this project and 2 other subdivision projects where Susan had found similar patterns, plus punitive damages that brought the total to about $470,000. The paving company filed for bankruptcy within 2 months of the judgment. They knew they couldn't pay, and their insurance wouldn't cover fraud. I heard they tried to challenge the bankruptcy proceedings, claiming the judgment was excessive, but it didn't work. The business was liquidated within a year. Ethan had to sell off all the equipment, and from what I understand, he's working as a shift supervisor at a concrete plant now. Sophia Hendricks and 2 other board members resigned immediately after the verdict. The HOA held an emergency election, and the new board was a lot more reasonable. They had the path removed from my property within a month, and they actually did a decent job with the restoration. You can still see where it was if you know what to look for, but the woods are growing back. About 6 months after our trial concluded, I heard through my attorney that the district attorney's office had opened a criminal investigation into the HOA board president and the paving company owner. Apparently our civil case had caught their attention. I gave a deposition for their investigation, but I wasn't directly involved in the criminal proceedings. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that Sophia ended up pleading guilty to some kind of fraud charge and got probation plus restitution. Ethan faced more serious charges, but I don't know how that all turned out. That part of it wasn't really my concern anymore. The whole thing took almost 3 years from start to finish, and honestly, I'm just glad it's over. Was it worth it? Financially, probably not when I factor in all my time and stress, even though the judgment covered my legal fees. But I wasn't going to let them get away with stealing my land, and I'm glad the fraud got exposed before they could do it to someone else. Apparently, the new HOA board discovered that Sophia had been running similar schemes with landscaping contracts and pool maintenance. The members of that HOA got seriously screwed by their own board. I still live here, and the subdivision is actually quiet now. The new HOA board stays in its lane and I stay in mine. A couple of residents have even apologized, saying they had no idea what the old board was doing and that they were embarrassed once the fraud came out. I appreciated that. I never had a problem with the residents themselves. I had a problem with the people who thought they could take my land and call it community improvement. The county eventually solved the pedestrian access issue the right way. They built a sidewalk along the highway on public right-of-way. It took longer and cost more than the HOA's illegal shortcut, but that is what should have happened from the beginning. Public access belongs on public land, not through my woods. The path through my property is gone now. The gravel was removed, the grade was restored, and new trees were planted. You can still see the old line if you know where to look, but every year the woods cover more of it. The undergrowth is coming back, the birds are back, and nobody cuts through my land anymore. Sophia resigned after the verdict. Ethan's paving company collapsed under the fraud judgment. The HOA had to pay to restore my property and then explain to its own members why their dues had been spent on an illegal path and inflated invoices. From what I heard, the new board later found similar problems with landscaping and pool maintenance contracts too. So no, I do not regret fighting it. The lawsuit took almost 3 years. It drained my time, wrecked my mood, and probably damaged more than one relationship. There were plenty of nights where I wondered if I should have just let it go. But then I would look out at that gravel path cutting through my woods and remember that they had built it while I was out of town after being told no on land they knew they did not own. If I had let that stand, the path would still be there. Sophia would probably still be president, Ethan would probably still be overbilling the HOA, and my property line would mean nothing. Now the woods are peaceful again. I can sit on my back deck in the evening and hear birds instead of strangers walking through my yard. The county sidewalk handles the pedestrian traffic. The HOA has new leadership. The contractor fraud got exposed, and the land behind my house is mine again. They wanted a shortcut through my property. Instead, they got a lawsuit, a fraud investigation, a bankrupt paving company, a recalled board, and a walking path that no longer exists. That is worth something. The next one is a malicious compliance story. I work at a very large company, a Fortune 50 company actually, but like everywhere else, management still manages to come up with one-size-fits-none metrics. The latest one was revealed to us by our manager, who surprisingly became the hero of this story. It has always been the metric that if you fall below 70% of your quota in a quota-eligible role, you risk being put on a performance review plan. It is also well known that anyone who gets put on one of those plans is pretty much toast. Either you get fired for failing it, or you become first on the list during the next round of layoffs. Usually, they replace you with a new hire fresh out of college in one of the lower 2 bands. My particular team is made up entirely of senior people. Every one of us is in one of the top 2 skill grades. So we know we are a target, which is insane, because all of us engage with C-suite executives at other very large Fortune 500 companies and act as trusted advisors. We cannot be replaced by a new graduate with intern-level performance. About 2 months ago, my boss was pulled into a 2-day seminar that went all the way up to the general manager of sales for the Americas. Several senior human resources managers were there too. It was a rare in-person meeting, so people were cautious, but at least they knew it was not a mass layoff situation. The first day was all about the path forward and how important our division was to the company's strategy. They talked about how our division was on the front line of expanding sales in the partner program. The goal was to take partner revenue from 60% to 85%, with 75% of new growth expected to come from the partner channels. The company was absolutely relying on our division and our skilled staff to deliver on that goal. The second day, however, was different. In the afternoon, they laid out the new plan for technical sellers, 80% attainment per year, backdated 2 years. That was when my manager went into I am just asking questions mode. He asked, "So let me understand this. If someone hit 100% attainment last year and 75% of the team did, but the previous year they hit 79%, then they are on a performance review plan?" Human Resources hesitated and danced around the answer for a bit, but eventually, yes, that was how it would work. My manager said, "I see. And there are no exceptions?" The general manager spoke up and said, "That is correct. Everyone must be a top performer, no exceptions." My manager started gathering his things. He said, "Would you mind if I skip the rest of the day? I have a lot of work to do, apparently." The general manager looked at him and said, "Well, no, we still have more to cover. What is so urgent?" My manager looked at him and maliciously complied with the stated metrics. Based on the metrics and the no exceptions rule, I have to prepare performance review plans for my entire team, no exceptions. I will also need to start the open headcount process to hire replacements for everyone. The general manager looked confused, like he was trying to digest this new information. Then most of the other managers started raising their hands. We need to go too. We need to write up performance review plans for all of our people and submit open headcounts. A quick count showed that 80% of our division would be on a performance review plan. Given the failure rate of those plans, that meant about 70% of the team would be fired, 10% would be laid off, and only 20% would remain. This was the same division supposedly leading the company's growth strategy, the tip of the spear in partner sales. My boss also pointed out that personnel retention and reduced turnover were part of the roll-up objectives, along with the attainment of his reports. That meant he would also need to be put on a performance review plan. So would his manager and her manager all the way up the chain. No exceptions. The meeting wrapped up after the discussion died down, and the general manager said they were not implementing this immediately, but in a few months. Over the next 2 months, there were more online meetings, more questions asked, more data pulled from the human resources systems, and more meetings with human resources and legal, who suddenly became very interested in this plan. That all culminated in a meeting this past Monday where the revised plan was revealed. A new exceptions plan had been put in place at the insistence of the legal department. Gone was the informal, put together a package to be evaluated for an optional exception for your employee approach. Now, there was a formal set of exceptions covering multiple categories. Some were legal categories, like taking family leave or short-term medical disability within the last 3 years. Others were functional categories, like having moved between departments or job titles, having had a non-quota designation within the last 2 years, or having a quota plan that changed significantly. Another exception applied if a metric had no previous history to set the target properly. There were around 10 to 12 categories, depending on how you counted the overlaps. An exception resets the timer to the next calendar year. So if someone qualifies in January, they are off the hook until the following January. As it turns out, everyone in the division now qualifies for one or more of those exceptions. Imagine that. Epilogue. It turns out human resources had not analyzed how many people would be impacted in our specific division. The numbers were calculated worldwide across more than 100,000 quota-carrying employees, not by department. Their overall number said 11% of employees would end up on performance review plans. Let us not even get into how they were clearly trying to reduce headcount by pushing people to leave or retire early. Also, when legal found out they were backdating the requirement, they went ballistic. Legal was also furious when they saw there were no exceptions for federally protected leave, such as family leave or medical disability. You have to love my boss. He looks out for us, often by maliciously complying with stupid requirements. The next one is an entitled people story. I moved to the Midwest from California about 6 years ago to start over and be closer to my mom. I moved into an apartment about 7 or 8 miles away from my mom and stepdad. My half-sister, whom I will call Cindy, had moved here with her 3 kids a few years before I did. We share a dad, but my mom is her stepmom. Cindy was going through a nasty divorce and needed a new place to live, so my mom offered to let her sublet a house that she and my dad had bought back in 2006 before they divorced. Cindy and her 3 kids moved in around 2013. I might have the year slightly wrong, but I think I am close. At that time, the kids would have been about 5, 7, and 23. My mom and stepdad did a lot for Cindy, and over the years it became clear that she was taking advantage of their kindness. They paid thousands of dollars for her divorce lawyer, which she never offered to pay back. They gave her a used car, which she later sold without giving them any money from it. She also never paid rent on time. My mom would often have to ask her, 3 weeks into the month, where the rent was. Cindy claimed she could not afford the house even with child support and alimony, but she also refused to get a job for most of the time she lived there. For about 5 years, she simply refused to work. In 2019, Cindy finally got a sales job selling carpet. She still claimed the rent was too much for her, and my mom often had to subsidize her. Eventually, my mom told her she wanted to sell the house and would give Cindy a year to move out. My mom would send her links to rental places, but Cindy would never respond. She was not making any real effort to move out. A year passed, and my mom confronted her about it, then extended the move-out date by another 3 months. I did not witness that conversation, but according to other family members, Cindy was furious. I once visited Cindy at work in 2020, and she told me it was illegal for my mom to force her to move out during the moratorium. When Cindy finally left, she left my mom's house a wreck. I helped my mom and stepdad clean everything. There was cat poop in almost every room, and even a pile of it on the toilet seat that my stepdad had to clean up. Cindy also left a lot of her belongings behind, including large items like a huge fake plant that nearly reached the ceiling, a desk, and a foosball table. My mom and I either sold those things for her or packed them up and gave them back to her. Cindy found an apartment for herself and her 3 kids somewhere between my place and my mom's. By that point, her kids would have been around 12, 14, and 30. Cindy's oldest child, whom I will call Garrett, is an alcoholic who struggles to hold down a job. He would constantly get into fights with his mother, then come stay with me for a night or two before returning home. In 2023, Cindy permanently kicked him out, and he ended up living in his car. That summer, the air conditioning in his car stopped working, so I took him in. He was honestly kind of awful while staying with me. He ate my food and never replaced it. He complained about my messes while living with me rent-free. Things like that. One weekend, I noticed $60 missing from my wallet. I confronted him about it through text, and he admitted he had taken it. I did not know what to do. I was working full-time and also had a part-time job on the side to make extra money. I could not afford to have someone living with me who was stealing from me. I left my partner's place and went home to talk to Garrett about it. Before confronting him, I had told my mom my concerns and asked her for advice. By the time I got home, my mom had already texted him saying she could not believe he would steal from me. He tried to turn the situation around on me and got angry that I had told my mom. I stayed calm, but I did call him out for his behavior. The next day, I kicked him out through text while I was not home. That was a big mistake. Over the next few months, I started noticing different things missing from my apartment. Books, board games, card games, DVDs, and even some very personal items were gone. Since then, I was able to take Garrett to small claims court and he paid me $400. He told me he stole my things because he was angry that I had kicked him out. There was no remorse and no apology. He acted like he was the victim and like I had wronged him. Cindy was embarrassed that I had taken him in and started trying to spread lies about me. She also tried spreading lies about my mom, claiming she had only been given a couple of months to move out of the house. Thankfully, no one in the family believes her. My mom is still in contact with both Cindy and Garrett, but I am not. The next one is an entitled parent story. My mother picked me up from work and we exchanged quick hellos as she put a Facebook video on her phone and played it out loud on the car dashboard, ready to drive us home. She did not ask how my shift was. She did not ask how I was in general. We did not talk about what was going on at home. It is always like this. The one time I mentioned, about a year ago, that she never asks about my day, she got angry and told me that if I wanted to talk about my day, then I should just speak. But that is not the same. I just want my mom to be interested. I want her to want to know about her daughter's day. My mom calls me rude whenever I try to express my feelings, and for some reason I keep convincing myself that maybe this time it will work. Maybe this time she will understand. But every time I have tried, it has ended badly. There have been times when I have completely broken down while trying to explain how I feel about her, about the way she treats me, about the lack of support I get from her regarding my mental health, and about how lonely I feel in my own home. Every time it turns into something awful. I do not want to exaggerate by calling it traumatic, but honestly, that is what it feels like. My brain has blocked out parts of those moments because remembering them clearly is distressing. My mom would scream at me, ignore me, scroll on her phone while I was crying, call me rude and useless, and say that I do not support her or do anything for her. She would say I never check up on her and never help around the house. Then she would call her sister and talk about me on the phone, and her sister would discipline me by saying I was making my mom sick and not helping her. It always made me feel like I was the problem child, even when all I was trying to do was explain that I was hurting. After those arguments, my mental health would spiral badly. I would be left feeling completely broken, alone, and unsafe inside my own mind. My dad and I have not spoken in 2 months since our last argument. In 2 weeks, I move out for university, and every day it seems more likely that we will not speak at all before I leave. I am watching people around me spend their last few days at home with their families. They are scared to leave because they do not want to see their parents cry. Meanwhile, the only thing on my mind is that I am truly alone. I do not feel like I have anyone who will miss me or love me in the way I need. I do look forward to leaving. I truly do. Moving out has been a dream of mine for as long as I can remember, but I do not really know how to explain the feeling inside me. The best I can say is that I feel sad and alone. This is supposed to be the time when children are closest to their families before leaving home. But I can honestly say I have never experienced that, and it hurts me mentally and physically to watch other people have what I have always wanted. I just want to experience, even for one moment, the kind of motherly and fatherly love people talk and write about. I want to feel free with my parents. I want to be my true and honest self around them. I want them to see me as their pride and joy. Instead, I feel like my mother sees me as a disappointment, like I am stupid and worthless. She never recognizes anything I do. She never says thank you, despite the years of parentification I have endured because of their failure to organize a work schedule that works for my younger siblings. For years, my life has revolved around my younger sisters. I have been like a third parent. I have canceled plans, canceled work, and even left work just to be there for them. I have never gotten a thank you. Since I got my job at 16, and I am 19 now, I have not asked my parents for financial support for anything. Most of my days consist of staying in my room if I am not at work. It is honestly depressing. When my dad is home, I avoid going downstairs because I have been avoiding him since our argument. That sometimes means I do not eat unless I can get my sister to bring food upstairs for me. So I just end up eating in my room. Without exaggerating, my whole day is spent in my room. My mother and I do not talk about anything, so she does not check on me or knock once. The last thing that has been bothering me is university. As I said, I am supposed to be going this year, but my parents are completely unprepared for it. I understand that finances can be difficult and that they have 2 other children, but part of me feels like they are unprepared because they just do not consider me. I am even a gap year student, so they had an extra year to prepare. Why is nothing ready for me, while they are prepared for my younger siblings going back to school? University is a big thing. Unfortunately, we cannot afford accommodation now, and they expect me to pay for it even though I do not have enough money either. I am stressed out and have no idea what to do because my student finance does not even cover half of what I need. Anyway, thank you for watching.